Hey, welcome back, modelers. So today, I've got something that could potentially be revolutionary when it comes to the scale modeling industry, but it could also be a complete waste of time and money on my part. So I'm going to show you where I'm at with the journey. Don't have an end result with it, but I wanted to kind of chronicleize my efforts and struggles going through this process, what I've learned. What are some of the things that you can avoid if you're trying to go down this rabbit hole? So what is this that I'm talking about? Well, I don't know how I came up with the idea, but I was going through the other day, I think a commercial came up or something, and I looked at aluminum foil earlier. Somebody posted on the internet where they were putting on aluminum foil on an aircraft and looked really cool. Looked very well done. So I kind of was thinking a little bit about that, and I think a commercial came up maybe for plated jewelry or something. I thought, electroplating. Wonder if anybody has done that with scale modeling, you know, because potentially what's more metallic than actual metal, right? So I engaged on a little bit of a quest. So I found a few videos on YouTube where very much it is done. So, cool. All I have to do is just buy the stuff, right? Well, it's a little more complex than that. There's a lot of videos to it where they have their methodology with it. And there's one guy that really sparks my curiosity where, you know, he goes in and has a big Mandalorian helmet and all sorts of like gold-plated stuff. All sorts of really amazing stuff. So I'll put that in the description of that guy. So I know it was possible, but a lot of the stuff that he uses doesn't export out of Europe, so that's a little bit of a problem. So there is some stuff in the US, but man, it's like $50 for a jar of paint to do some of this stuff, and that's a bit tough pill to swallow. So I want to see if I could do this a little more affordable, and there are some people on YouTube that are doing such thing. So I'm gauged on that a little bit. But there's three things that I kind of have to, challenges to hurdle and things to answer. One, to be able to electroplate, you have to actually have a conductive surface. So if I wanted to electroplate something metallic like this and want to nickel plate it, chrome it, that process is not very difficult necessarily. But this is conductive. Plastic is not conductive. So you have to have first a conductive layer. So talk a little bit about that in a sec, and then get into, well, what metal looks most realistic? What looks like it? Because aluminum isn't exactly plateable. And so we're going to have to fool a little bit with a different metal that works similarly. So I try to play around a little bit with that. And then the final question, is it even worth it? Does it look superior to getting into the metallic paints that I use? That is to be seen. There's also some other challenges that make up, you know, if I paint something on the cockpit, is that going to just melt away in the bath? That could be a problem. So I have to do some kind of creation where I put the cockpit in last or something like that. Paint the cockpit last. So there's a lot of hurdles to come over with just the basic concept of it. So the first part, we get into a conductive finish. I'm not going to get into what electroplating really is. Be honest, I barely escaped by my second try at Chem 101 in college. So I'm very much not a person that could explain it very well.
It's science.
But basically, you have a bath that's acidic, and what you have is ability for electrons to flow from your anode to the cathode. It's going to be the surface that you want that metal to come over and stick to. So in order to that to happen, you have to have it be conductive. So how do you do that? Well, you can buy the paint that is. That can be done. But I played around because I didn't want to wait, right? Well, graphite is conductive, and some modeling pigments like this, polished metal, is graphite, and graphite is conductive. So I played around with that and got some decent results. But how do you know it's conductive? Well, if you want a yes or no answer, you can actually make a circuit. And so I did that to be able to have a battery and a LED and put that up against the surface. Light comes on, it's conductive. But then how conductive is it becomes the next thing. So I get in and I assume I'm going to just start with my own brew of graphite with just pigments. And so I start out with that. And I go in and I also have a multimeter. So I'm measuring resistance in ohms to try to see how conductive it is. Because if the less resistance that you have, the more conductive it actually is. So that's the way I was actually measuring all of this. And so I'll have that video here. So when I go through that, you know, it's kind of a okay result. So I go in, and let's see if it actually works. So the initial bath, I didn't want to do anything too crazy chemical-wise. So I'm just getting into water and distilled vinegar pretty much. And then going in and having my positive charge from my machine, my generator. There's a couple different words for it, but basically it's a thing that's going to make my electricity juice in the water, right? So what I have is positive connected to copper, negative connected to copper, and it doesn't have basically a way to go other than just leach in. And it's cool because your bath changes from clear to blue. And so I did that, let it go for a long time, got a blue bath. Looked like things were going well. I was able to try on a few different metals, like get into just like a brass sheet, or get into the actual some currency. Probably not the most legal thing to do, but I did that. And I was getting some results. So then went in and made a couple of just dummy test strips just out of some scrap pieces that I have going around. And so I put on that paint. Couldn't really get it to stick right. So I don't know. I was playing with the voltage. Maybe there's not enough amperage in it. Maybe this and this. Maybe that's the variable. No. In fact, it can actually be worse if you're putting in too much juice. So I was like, well, maybe it's not conductive enough. So that got me down the rabbit hole of question number one, conductive paint, right? So the polished pigment of some graphite. So I started out with that, and it was pretty good, but I'm like, okay, maybe I need to buy some purpose-built stuff. So that is where I picked up these MG Chemicals Total Ground Copper Conductive Paint 838AR. So this is basically a lacquer paint that has carbon graphite basically into it, already suspended. You can thin it with lacquer thinner. Most of the time I wanted something pretty thick, so I just put it on. And then I also found out it is more conductive if you polish the surface. So I went in and did that. And yeah, pretty good results, but still, for whatever reason, some of the paint I made was actually better. But I used it and it worked mostly. So I did a few test samples with this. And, you know, it was kind of hit and miss when it comes to having any of the copper adhere to it. Which, why am I trying copper? It's what everybody recommends. It's cheap. It's a little easier to plate with. So I started out with that to see if it can do that, and then put a layer of something, you know, that's a white metal over it. So it was kind of, let's make my own. So I went fancy, and I got into copper dust. I found this on eBay, and it's like micron level, fine particulate copper. It's copper, very conductive. And you can buy copper paint, but in a jar like this, it's like $50. So it's like, no, let's try to see if I can make it my own, because that's going to be smart. And in the end, I probably paid close to the end amount. Actually, no, I have spent on copper paint the same amount if I just bought anyway. So that was stupid because I got this. This was probably about 15 bucks. And then I've got like a good old pound of copper powder and try to mix that in. Tried a couple of different types of paint to mix it in, but I couldn't get it to really emulsify in there or mix. It would just sink to the bottom and it would be horrible to try to paint because you just have this copper glob preventing the airbrush from actually spewing. So that didn't work. So I tried also doing, well, maybe if it's like a copper sulfate powder. So I tried doing a few things with that. Every paint that I did, I don't know, maybe there's some leftover acid in there or something, but man, whatever it was, it just immediately gumped up. So it's like, nope, that's stupid. So the next one that I tried is off the internet and getting into artist graphite powder, and then this Speedball Super Black Ivory ink, or India ink, and it doesn't want to, it was okay through the airbrush, but I tried thinning it with water and that was a complete disaster. And then, I don't know, jury's still out on that one. Last time I tried it, it just kind of melted all off. And so, yeah, maybe I need to have it dry for 24 hours and then it works. But then I decided to go back to my actual favorite, right? Everybody's Mr. Hobby leveling thinner and Surfacer 1500 and the graphite. So I did that, and that seems to be pretty good. Pretty resilient with that type of primer. So that's where I'm at the moment. Also bought this Sophisticated Finishes Copper Metallic Surfacer because it's definitely copper, it is conductive, and then it will actually oxidize. So this seemed promising for 20 bucks. And I was like, well, man, that's smart of me. If I can spend 20 bucks on this instead of 50, that's great. However, instead I just wasted 50 bucks because it's not really the easiest to apply and have it stick and be the right amount of layers. Because if you don't have the right coverage, that conductive, you know, needs to be throughout the whole surface for it to work, which it actually just stops. And if you break, it won't work. So you have to have seamless conductivity throughout the whole thing. So in short, that's where I am with question one, where this works, but it's good. I mean, 20 bucks for this thing, and where this big bag was 20 bucks, and you know, I could make quite a bit with this. And then leveling thinner, the ink was like 7 bucks, so pretty good resolution, and I was able to get some pretty good connectivity with it, but still not amazing, kind of in the kiloohm area, so not the best. So, but I am getting surface adhesion with it. Just starts to get a little bit weird looking. So with that, started getting into copper plating, and I've got a couple of examples with that. This is P51, just some overtrees from Eduard that just threw together, and it's pretty cool. I mean, it's copper, so it's like tripled its weight. And, you know, if it's cold outside, your aircraft is cold, and it's really interesting with it. It has a lot more durability to it, so some people are asking like, oh, does it like just chip off and stuff? It's like, no, it actually is more strong than the plastic itself. Like, I could probably throw this and it may dent rather than break. So there's some cool properties to that. But when getting into the bath, that's where we got into some issues. So initially, like I said, start out with just vinegar and water and you know, a few different pieces with that, and I wasn't getting the best adhesion. And I assumed it was all about the paint. I gotta get something that's super conductive. Well, actually it's not quite as important. As long as you do have some conductivity and you have a better bath. So I learned, number two, that your bath needs to be pretty dang robust. So I changed to a different kind of setup that I'll link into the description, the video of the guy that put it in there. In the end, I think it might be a little bit too acidic, but this one definitely not for the faint of heart. Basically, getting into some copper sulfate crystals, which is not the biggest deal, basically just for not drain cleaning, but root killing for drains. So you can get something like that, $15 for a big jar, and you can make over a gallon of the blue water at that point. Then you gotta have some acid. So with this, it recommended sulfuric acid, which, oh boy. Yeah, so make sure that you are using PPE protection and everything with this. Vinegar, you know, not much of an issue. I've seen some other people, I wouldn't recommend it, but they will actually drink some of that stuff, which probably tastes horrible, but it's mostly vinegar, so but wasn't working the best. Now, sulfuric acid, pretty top of the charts. Now you're diluting it at about a 1/10 with water, so you have some of that, and then just a scotch of muriatic acid. So talking with some people, that actually might be a little bit too strong. So that's one of the variables. Now that mix has worked much better, and assuming what's happening is it's able to help leach those ions off of the copper, so it goes into the solution and then can flow over to your subject, right? I don't know, like I said, got a C in the class, maybe even a D. I barely passed Chem 101. But able to get into some good stuff with it, but still, other variables that you get into, the amperage that you're setting it up as. Some of this got a little bit too cooked. Also, I think I had too many impurities that grew into that mix because I put it in like this, half and half, and this side is super rough. It said even with some polishing, it's very rough. Whereas with this, maybe the setting was a little bit different for the amperage, but I think it's more of the impurities. So generally speaking, something much lower. You want to start lower with the amperage and then work your way up. But that becomes another big variable. If you get into too much, you're going to have like crystallization flowing and all that. You can see in some areas here it's a little tricky, but there's all sorts of stuff growing off of it is what it looks like, and that kind of not good. So that becomes a big issue with it. So that's a little bit of where I'm at now with the two prototypes that I've got. Here you got into a 144 F86, and so I did copper, polished the copper, and then put a thin layer of nickel, and I need to put a little bit more because the copper is kind of showing through, but it looks pretty cool, so pretty promising with this setup. Now, revolutionary? Don't know yet. Comparing it to some of the other stuff, and if you know your metals, some people will look at it and go, yeah, that's definitely nickel. That is not steel or aluminum or anything like that.
No, and I don't care.
But here's a fuel tank that I also did and finished it up in nickel, and it's pretty cool. I think it definitely has some different things that I messed up on, but I kind of polished through and it worked out pretty well. So that's kind of interesting, but it looks like pretty natural, right? You even have a little bit of the dings and stuff from different things where I messed up, and that kind of just creates a little bit of, I don't know, weathering, I guess, some interest to it. So it's pretty cool. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think the Mr. Leveling Thinner Graphite combo is a good combo, and what I've got next in the pot right now is going through a Eduard Spitfire, just kind of some overtrees again, and I'm going through that process and trying to lower my voltage. I've got the better mix and all that. Maybe we get into something useful. So in the next section I'll show you where I'm at with that, but couple weeks into it, and it's crazy. I don't know if it's even going to be worth it in the end, but I thought it would be interesting to you guys, so I want to put that on here. But man, also definitely not cheap. The electronics for it was about 40 bucks on Amazon. You got to get into some anodes. The paint, obviously I wasted a bunch of money on that. You could get into it for closer to 30 bucks if you do it the way that I'm doing now and not all the stuff I messed up with, or get into some better stuff. So there's some options there. But so far it's looking a couple $100 at least on this, and definitely a lot of time. If you think surface preparation and all the work that you do with metallic finishes is a bit much, this is a whole nother field. Oh my goodness, it is crazy. You're polishing metal, which is completely different from polishing paint. So there's a whole bunch of factors into it. But I've been learning a lot, and I think it's very fascinating. Been kind of polishing and plating some other stuff. You know, just like people will do jewelry. I've just kind of trying to plate some leaves, so I'll show you some examples of that. But definitely a lot more learning to come. So I'll be following up with the next videos and show you kind of where we're at with that process. So we'll see you on that one.